As friend of the show David Sirota shared with us last week, Don't Look Up tells the story of two scientists who discover a planet-killer comet headed straight for Earth. And despite their protests, society fails to heed their warning, with some ignoring or outright challenging expert data.
In a recent article for The Guardian, climate scientist Peter Kalmus writes that scientists' feelings in the film mirror the desperation and worry that he, many other climate scientists, feel every day trying to wake people up to the climate crisis. He joins us now to discuss how the film captures the madness he sees every day. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So I haven't seen the film yet, but we talked to David Sirota the other day, and my wife watched it while she was quarantining, and she really liked it. Your sense was that this was almost surreal because this is a problem you contend with, trying to get people to, be as concerned about climate change as you are?
Absolutely. Yeah, it feels surreal to have this knowledge and to see some number of years or decades into the future on this trajectory that our society is heading. And it's a longer time scale than a comet impacting the Earth, but it seems to me of a similar level of catastrophe. And it's very strange to, see everyone going about their regular lives. I think in many cases, not even aware of the dire danger our civilization is in. Yeah.
How soon do you think this killer comet that you're talking about is coming to Earth? And what exactly does this killer comet do to us, in the real world?
That's part of what makes it so complicated. So it's unfolding in real time, but the impacts are complicated. They're they're multifaceted. There's ecosystems that are starting to die, like coral reefs, like mountains, forests in the mountains. Amazon rainforest is starting to convert into a grassland. There's extreme humid heat, which is going to, in many parts of the world, start to become increasingly uninhabitable for the human body. There's sea level rise. There's agricultural impacts. There's water impacts. There's going to be climate migrants moving up from close to the equator, trying to get closer to the poles, which could cause, very strong political reactions by countries, even possibly leading to warfare. So you take all of this together and many, many other impacts as well. And it's just completely unclear how that's going to unfold on our planet over the coming years.
I mean, there's a collective action problem, right? And probably you and I would probably disagree on some of this. Obviously, I think climate change is happening and has bad effects and is something we should try to mitigate the harms of. But we the United States is one country. There's China, Russia, Europe, all sorts of other places. We can't control their policies, and we feel like tweaking the dials on how much carbon we're pumping into the atmosphere. How much does that accomplish if other countries are not doing the same? Or and also the commitments we make don't even seem to, as far as I can tell, according to the sort of the most apocalyptic scientists, won't be good enough anyway. So it then becomes why are we going to do anything sort of situation?
Well, that's a very cynical view. You have to start somewhere. So part of the reason I wrote the piece and the reason I'm excited about this film is because for 15 years, I've been trying to use facts and science to wake people up. And then I learned that you have to start communicating on a more emotional basis, basically, and say how you're actually feeling. And now I'm realizing that we need, and I have for a while, I've been frustrated by the lack of what I call climate stories and climate storytelling. But it's clear to me that world leaders have been absolutely ineffective. They go to these international UN conferences. They say this is an existential crisis for humanity, and then they keep expanding the fossil fuel industry. And every country is doing this. Nearly every country is doing this. So I think the only way out for us is to have a massive grassroots movement that's many, many times bigger than it is now and much more unified. And I think there's a lack of stories. And to get a big collective movement like that, you need to have very compelling stories to get people on the same page. And they have to be mainstream. They can't just be fringe things. And so that's what excited me about this movie so much. And then on a personal level, I felt seen, which was a huge deal for me. Because again, screaming into the void for 15 years and being largely ignored and feeling gaslighted by society, everyone, a lot of people saying this isn't happening, it's a hoax, you're being paid off or something, all this strange climate denial that happens. And then even the gaslighting from people who say, yeah, we're listening to the scientists, but then they're not doing anything. So to see a movie like this just land in the mainstream, and to see kind of the accuracy with which it portrays this struggle to warn society, a society that has these norms that things are always going to be the way they are now, right? And it's very hard for them to see the kinds of radical changes that we're going to need to make to save what we can. It was, for me, emotionally cathartic.
Yeah, there's just a lot of, for one, politicizing of science. And so what happens is, obviously, with climate or any other sort of science, is that, yes, there's some realities that are happening. And scientists like yourself are saying, hey, this is what the science is showing us, and it's real. And then, unfortunately, people take it to an extreme for their political agenda. I know a lot of countries around the world are feeling like, oh, the climate disaster is just being used to slow down their own potential progress, to help keep the countries that are already at the forefront on the forefront. Brazil accuses the West of this all the time, saying, hey, right when we're just starting to develop, and same with China, they say, right when we're just starting to develop, you guys are trying to hinder us and telling us that we can't because we have to help with this climate crisis. And so because it gets politicized, and there's probably some truth to that, right? Some of them, politicians are taking the science and then they're using it for their whatever political gain or whatever agenda they have. And so that is one of the big problems that I think scientists like yourself face. Do you find that? Do you find that sometimes it just gets like it becomes irrational, and so then the science just gets overlooked, and then it doesn't become like a rational discussion about what do we need to do?
Yeah, it's completely irrational. It's not science-based, it's money and it's power-based. And the biggest opponent and the biggest blocking force has been the fossil fuel industry itself, which it's been highly publicized, and it should be widely known by the public that this industry has been lying and lying to everyone for decades on purpose. They knew what this was doing to the planet. They knew that this could completely undermine civilization. They knew it could potentially kill billions of people. And for decades, for their own profits, they kept doing this. They kept lying. They kept, influencing legislation, blocking climate action at every turn. ExxonMobil came up with a playbook in 1990, which they spread to all the other oil majors on how to call the science into question and how to keep the public ignorant and how to prevent legislation. And they're still doing it today. And they come up with things like carbon capture, which is this, science fiction technology, which barely exists today, doesn't exist at scale, and may never exist at scale because it's too expensive, as a way to give policymakers and the public something to latch onto to avoid the thing we need to do, the cause of everything that's happening on the planet right now, the immediate cause. There's other causes behind this, but the immediate cause is the fossil fuel industry. So to stop climate and ecological breakdown right now, the most important thing to do is rapidly ramp down the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry was the biggest delegation at COP26. And you see policymakers talking about everything under the sun, dancing around the issue, but refusing to stand up to the fossil fuel industry because they're in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. It's that simple. So to fight against that force, that's why we need a strong enough grassroots movement that, and the thing that really frightens me is that, we don't really live in a democracy. If we did, I think we'd have a lot of climate action by now, because it's getting extremely popular if you look at the polls, 3/4 of, 70%, 3/4, depending on how things are phrased, want climate action. And yet we're not getting it, right? Because the policymakers are listening more to the special interests, the fossil fuel industry, to the lobbyists, instead of the public. And I'm scared that I'm afraid that this is going to get worse going forward, that the kind of connection between what the public wants and what the policymakers are willing to do is going to get even more tenuous, which is unfortunately why we need such a strong movement. And then to go even one step further, if I may, they're starting to even implement legislation to make direct action by climate activists, more punished much more strongly with longer jail sentences, labeling climate activists as terrorists, et cetera. So I feel like we may be entering a very dark time, and there's a race between the grassroots movement and the special interests that want to keep dredging out fossil fuel and burning it right to the very end.
And that's a problem that's been going on, for a long, long time. I will just say that when I was when I was 11 years old, it was a long time ago, back in the early 90s, I was part of the early environmental movement and even presented legislation, an anti-deforestation bill, and was flagged, always by the government as potentially terrorists, because that's back when Earth First was chaining themselves up to trees. And so that sort of narrative of calling climate activists and those of us who've been in front of the environmental movement as terrorists or labeling has been going on for a really long time, interestingly. So it's really unfortunate that that's been going on for so long.
It's a fight between basically the people and a livable planet and the established power centers. So they're not just going to volunteer to relinquish their power, unfortunately. And I think the human brain is so complex. They probably think they're the good guys, they're going to keep burning. They have all kinds of ways to rationalize what they're doing. They probably believe a lot of the lies about calling. The science is so rock solid at this point. There's such a strong consensus on the basic picture. And yet they probably find ways to reject it even within their own brains, I would think. So it's just the epic struggle for our species right now, I think.
Peter Kalmus, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.